Welcome to a Legendarium special about Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, a tale of a perfect murder. Or is it? Written only 3 years before Poe's death in 1846, The Cask of Amontillado is only a few pages long, barely longer than the more famous Telltale Heart. It centers on a protagonist named Montresor and his plans for revenge against his enemy Fortunato. At the time of its writing, Poe feuded with another author named Thomas Dunn English. Poe wrote slashing reviews of English's works, which helped to earn Poe the nickname the Comanche of literature. In turn, English wrote a story featuring a dysfunctional alcoholic named Marmaduke Hammerhead, who is plainly modeled on Poe. English wrote that Hammerhead never gets drunk more than 5 days a week. It seems that Poe in turn modeled the antagonist Fortunato on Thomas Dunn English. For the story, Poe likely took inspiration from an urban legend set at Castle Island in South Boston. During his time in the U.S. Army, Poe learned of a legendary duel between a Lieutenant Massey and a deeply unpopular rival of his. After Massey died in the duel, Massey's friends supposedly got the rival drunk, led him into the fort's basement, encased him in a stone wall, and left him to die. Now, on to the story. It is not clear where the story takes place. Most readers assume it is set in Italy because of the many Italian names and wines. However, Montresor is a French name, and Montresor claims to live in an ancestral home. Montresor, the murderous protagonist of the Cask of Amontillado, described Fortunato in scathing terms. Montresor says, "The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge." Montresor's family motto reads, "No one cuts me with impunity," and he will live up to those words. Like many of Poe's protagonists, Montresor seems absurdly oversensitive and possibly delusional. Could Montresor have imagined these 1,000 injuries? Might he simply be jealous of Fortunato's good fortune? We do not know, but we know from the beginning that Montresor plans to have his revenge upon the ironically named Fortunato. The suspense comes from finding out how it will be taken. The action of the story is even simpler than that depicted in the Telltale Heart, and centers on a single scene. Montresor accosts a drunken Fortunato during the carnival. He described Fortunato as a man to be respected and feared, but one overly proud about his supposed knowledge of wines. Indeed, wine plays an important role in Fortunato's destruction. He is drunk at the carnival, wearing a striped fool's costume with a cap and bells, a sign he will be made a fool of. When Montresor asks him for his opinion about a shipment of Amontillado he recently bought, a rare Italian sherry, Fortunato gleefully accepts the challenge to determine if Montresor in fact bought Amontillado. However, Fortunato is plainly intoxicated when he goes to prove his expertise. A true wine connoisseur knows this would dull one's taste and make the task impossible. Could this prove that Fortunato merely thinks he knows wine when he does not? Whatever the case, Montresor leads Fortunato down a long staircase, asking Fortunato to take care, his words sharp with irony. At the bottom of the staircase, the two men enter an underground tomb that houses generations of Montresor's family. Throughout the long journey through the catacombs, Montresor toys with his victim. When Fortunato begins coughing, Montresor asks if he would like to go back to preserve his health. Fortunato replies that he will not die from a cough, and with morbid humor, Montresor answers, "True." Montresor urges Fortunato to drink more wine to keep out the cold, and Fortunato happily obliges. Along the way, Fortunato asks Montresor about his family coat of arms. Montresor describes it as a huge human foot crushing a serpent whose fangs are stuck in the heel. This is another symbol of Montresor's upcoming revenge, but a vengeance that might come at a high price. Going through the catacombs, the two men pass vaults heavy with nitre and huge casks of wine. When the increasingly drunk Fortunato asks Montresor if he is part of a Masonic brotherhood, suddenly, Montresor claims to be one and shows a trowel to prove it. Fortunato is not surprised that Montresor is a Mason, which could be an insult among gentlemen who do not have to do physical labor to earn a living. Finally, the two push aside a heap of bones hiding an interior recess about 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, and 7 feet tall. It appears to have no purpose beyond separating two supports. Yet Montresor now has a purpose for it. The drunken Fortunato stumbles inside looking for the Amontillado, and Montresor chains him up. Once more, Montresor mockingly asks Fortunato if he wants to go back up, and then begins walling up the niche. With relish, Montresor lays the first tier of masonry. He stops enjoying the bricklaying when Fortunato's drunkenness begins to wear off, and the shackled man begins screaming. Montresor screams back until Fortunato falls silent, then he resumes the work, but now rushed and anxious. When only one brick remains unsealed, a low laugh comes from Fortunato, now walled up. He declares that Montresor pulled off a fine joke, and he says they will soon laugh over it. They exchange a few last words before Fortunato goes silent, aside from the jingling of his bells. Montresor suddenly feels sick, blames it on the damp, which is of course an obvious lie, and seals up the last brick despite his unease. He then puts the rampart of bones back in place. Montresor is one of the few Poe protagonists who gets away with his crime, as far as we know. He claims to have gotten away with the murder 50 years ago, yet why is he only talking about it now? Could it be remorse? Might he have gone demented and started bragging about his dread secret? During Poe's time, many people dreaded the idea of premature burial, a real possibility in an age of crude medical science. Indeed, safety coffins included bells that could be run from a rope built inside the box. However, there will be no such rescue for Fortunato. If the man proved lucky, he would have died of asphyxiation within a couple of hours. If not, he would have died of dehydration within a few days. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.